There is a phrase so embedded in modern life that it no longer sounds like advice. It sounds like a law. Be yourself. We say it to children on their first day of school. We build brands around it. We treat it as the final answer to every question about how to live. And yet, the people most devoted to self-expression are rarely the most at peace. They are more often the most anxious, endlessly curating, endlessly redefining, endlessly performing a version of themselves they hope will finally feel real. Something in this picture is not quite working out for us. The Truman Show is at its core a film about authenticity. Truman Burbank lives inside a world engineered to feel complete. Every relationship is scripted, every comfort is provided. Even the sky is artificial. And yet something in him cannot rest. He does not leave because he has found himself. He has not. He leaves because he can no longer live inside a world built on illusion, even a beautiful one. He would rather risk death pursuing truth than remain alive, performing a life that was never his. This is not self-expression. This is something older and more demanding. The willingness to submit to reality, even when reality is costly. And that is why the pursuit of truth gives life weight. Previous civilizations ask a different question. Not, who am I? But, what is true? What is good? What must I become? The self was never the starting point. It was the subject of formation, something to be shaped by truth, by discipline, by something outside and larger than itself. Modern culture reversed this order entirely. Truth became personal. Meaning became internal. Identity became self-generated. Expression replaced formation. And once the self was crowned the highest authority, rest became impossible, because the self was never designed to bear that weight. Jean-Jacques Rousseau argued that man is born good and corrupted only by civilization. Strip away society's distortions, he believed, and the natural innocence beneath will emerge. This assumption quietly underwrites modern therapeutic culture, identity politics, and expressive individualism. It extends further still into political theories that locate human malice entirely in material conditions, believing that if systems are corrected, the goodness within will finally surface. It is a bold assumption. In practice, it consistently fails to deliver, not by eliminating corruption, but by concentrating it, hiding the worst abuses behind centralized power and carefully managed narratives. Reformed Christianity begins from the opposite premise, not innocence, but disorder. Not a self wanting to be freed, but a will that is already bound. As John Calvin observed,
man's nature, so to speak, is a perpetual factory of idols.
and the most convincing idol it produces Augustine of Hippo located the problem with a precision that has not been improved upon. The human heart is not ruled by reason, it is ruled by what it loves. Modern behavioral science repeatedly confirms this, though rarely in those terms. Long before neuroscience mapped the dopamine loop, or behavioral economics cataloged human irrationality, Christian theology had already named the root. The will is not neutral. It is not a blank instrument waiting for direction. It bends reliably, predictably. toward whatever promises comfort, approval, or relief from pain. Our so-called true self does not speak from some untouched inner core. It shifts with incentive, with fear, with reward, with the endless need to justify its own choices. And yet culture insists, look inward, trust yourself, express everything. This is not liberation, it is abandonment. Social media did not corrupt authenticity. It exposed its limits. Platforms reward emotional display, not logical coherence. Visibility, not truth. Outrage, not wisdom. And so sincerity became an aesthetic. Tears were edited. Vulnerability became a marketing strategy. The rawest was personal moments were refined and timed for maximum reach. Sociologist Erving Goffman warned, decades before the algorithm existed, that all social life involves impression management. We are always, to some degree, performing. The tragedy is not that we perform. The tragedy is we have come to confuse the performance with the self, and call the confusion authenticity. The person who posts their unfiltered truth has still chosen which truth to post, which angle to film it from, and which caption to make it land. The self, left to express itself freely, does not become more real. It simply becomes more managed. Philosopher Charles Taylor described the modern condition as the age of authenticity, a culture in which the highest moral obligation is to be true to an inner voice that only you can hear. But a self that must generate its own meaning from within collapses under pressure. If fulfillment is inside you, dissatisfaction with life is your fault. If authenticity is the goal, the self must be endlessly curated, managed, refined, presented until authenticity becomes the most deliberate performance of all. So we express more, redefine more, label more, not because the self is being discovered, but because it keeps slipping away. When identity becomes sacred, disagreement becomes violence. If the self is the highest good, then anything that challenges it is not merely wrong, it is threatening. Debate becomes trauma. Criticism becomes erasure. The political arena, which once debated policy, becomes a theater of recognition, a place where people come not to govern, but to be seen. Sociologist Philip Reif warned that when sacred order collapses, culture produces what he called psychological man, a self that must be endlessly validated because it has nothing sturdier beneath it. Christopher Lasch, writing in The Culture of Narcissism, went further. The pursuit of self-fulfillment, he argued, leads not to autonomy, but to a new kind of dependence. Dependence on affirmation, on visibility, on the continuous approval of an audience whose verdict is never final. A society organized around fragile selves must manage emotions constantly, because nothing more durable exists beneath them. Historic Christianity never flattered the self. It did not command expression, it commanded repentance, a word that in the original Greek, metanoia, means not guilt, but a complete reorientation of mind. Not because the self is worthless, but because it's disordered. Die to yourself was not annihilation, it was surgery, the removal of what was destroying the patient. so that what remained could finally function as it was made to. Meaning, this framework is not discovered inward. It is received as a gift, not achievement, something that arrives from the outside that cannot be seized or manufactured, only accepted or refused. Freedom was not the absence of restraint. It was the healed will, freed from the compulsions that diminish a person beneath their own nature, and restored to a life it did not have to invent. This vision offends the modern ear because it dethrones the self. It says the inner voice is not the final authority, that expression without formation produces noise, not truth, that the search for the authentic self will not end where it promised, but it also removes something that the culture of self-expression never mentions: the unbearable burden of inventing yourself from nothing. When the self stops pretending to be its own source of meaning, it can finally breathe. And ideally, for the first time, stops being fragile. So does the obsession with authenticity make us more fake? Not always, but always eventually. Because the self turned inward has no foundation beyond its own shifting loyalties. It can perform without end, express without limit, redefine without resolution, and still find no solid ground. The self was not made to be its own center of gravity. It was made for something outside itself. A person who entered history bore human disorder without being consumed by it, and offers in return an identity that does not depend on performance to survive, and does not collapse the moment the audience stops watching.